Hello and welcome to the British Sitcom History Podcast. You are listening to part 2 of our look at The Blackadder, Series 1 of Blackadder. Part 1 was last week, so if you haven't listened to that, go back and check it out. We've already done a deep dive on Richard Curtis there. We've looked at his films even, well, one of them, and thrown a bit of unnecessary shade his way. But this week, we will be getting back into our episode. It's episode 4 of The Blackadder, and it's the one where he has to marry Miriam Margolyes, and we're just about to get into Margolyes and Jim Broadbent. So, let's go!
Okay, so in the next scene, we have the great arrival of the Infanta. So this is, and they come as a pair. This is Miriam Margolyes as the Infanta and her interpreter, played by Jim Broadbent.
The interpreter's name is never given in the show, but in the credits is known as Don Speak English.
Oh man, that's a bad joke, isn't it?
Well, I think he put that in the credits, not in the, like I say, it's just a little
joke.
thing in the credits.
So we've already touched on Jim Broadbent. We'll come back to him in a sec. Let's talk Miriam Margolyes first. So the Infanta, basically the characterization of the Infanta is that she's she's a sexual predator. She's overbearing, lustful, and pretty into Edmund. Let's put it that way.
And the overall arching thing here is that she's like, oh my god, so hideous, and like, oh god, you want to. She seems like she'd be a bit of a laugh, to be honest.
She's all right. She's quite good fun.
She's well up for it.
She has that tash, she'll be right.
But yeah, obviously the idea is she's fat and ugly.
Yeah.
So who do you get? Who do you cast? We need a fat, ugly person.
It's not nice.
How do you make that call?
It's really not nice. Is that Miriam Margolyes' on her casting notes? That's what it says.
I mean, these days you would probably word it more tactfully, but I bet in the 80s it said that, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, so Miriam Margolyes is today, as we record this in 2023. She's still alive.
She is still going.
She's kind of, again, I wouldn't say she's not national treasure, but she's kind of got this status of iconoclast. She's an old lady who swears, which we've established is hilarious. And she's one of those people who goes on the telly and is always going to say the wrong thing, and
She's also, politically active and seems to be very much on the liberal side. So it has a slight anti-authority sense, but it plays well with the crowd who are actually listening. So I don't know how could anyone possibly dislike Miriam Margolyes?
Well, I have an unpopular opinion on Miriam Margolyes.
Go on. Why do you hate Miriam Margolyes?
Well, like Miriam Margolyes, I'm something of an iconoclast. No, I just think she's a rude old lady. You don't go on This Morning and start swearing at Richard Madeley. That's rude.
But Richard Madeley's a tosser, so it's
he is. That was a really terrible example. No, listen, I guess it's a little like Brian Blessed in the sense that I just don't like the shtick. It doesn't appeal to me.
I know what you mean.
Just swearing, saying the C word on the news is not a character. It's it's just rude. It's inappropriate.
I know what you mean, but yeah, that's her shtick, isn't it? Yeah, I think compared to Brian Blessed is probably.
Listen, I've nothing particularly against Miriam Margolyes, but I don't quite see the great love for her. Rather than focusing on this, why don't we talk about her work as an actor? Tell me about what she's been in other than being the Infanta in Blackadder.
Well, obviously, I'm only interested in sitcom, and she hasn't really done much in that area. But she, again, another one who is a stage actor, a character actor. You have to be a character actor when you look like that. That means you're ugly. That's what the vernacular character actor. But yeah, you if you're 5 foot and nothing and overweight, you're not gonna be playing the leading lady. So she is someone who's very much has come into her own as an older actor, which often happens with character actors because the parts are there. You can play the anarchic aunt. Or by which I mean your mother's sister, not a little insect. But you can play that as well. Margolyes has certainly played a very good trade as a voice actor. That was pretty much her stock in trade in her earlier days.
Has she ever played an ant?
I don't know, but very likely, yes. She's done a lot of children's things and all that sort of thing. So, yeah, and perhaps in her later years now is more renowned as a kind of commentator and general personality rather than an actor. But she still does plenty of work. I tell you what, the only kind of really good sitcom thing I could find in which she was doing anything with any regularity was a short run in the sitcom Trolleyed.
Oh, yeah.
Which no one's ever seen.
No, I never saw that. I'm familiar with it. Do you know what? I just remembered. This is one of those facts that everyone knows. Miriam Margolyes was the voice of the Cadbury's Caramel Bunny, who was the sexiest cartoon character of the 80s until Jessica Rabbit.
You just have to take it easy with Cadbury's Caramel.
That's one of those facts that everyone sort of knows, and I've just remembered it.
Yes, exactly.
So that's how Miriam Margolyes puts food on the table. Cadbury's Caramel money.
I guarantee she's earned more from that than Blackadder. I'll tell you that much.
Yes.
So yeah, that is how you put put food on the table. Yeah. Shall we talk about Jim Broadbent quickly?
Let's talk about Jim Broadbent. So we'll talk about the character in a sec. We came across Jim Broadbent in our Only Fools and Horses episodes.
About the same time as this?
About the same time as this. And obviously Jim Broadbent's a kind of... Is he Oscar-nominated actor? He's a,
Oscar-winning now.
I beg your pardon, sorry.
Iris, I think he won for.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So, he's a world-class movie actor. But in the early 80s, he was a sitcom bit part actor, wasn't he?
He was definitely a bit of an up-and-comer in the 80s. Like, everyone was already talking about him, and I think he did, again, a lot of theatre work and all that sort of thing. But
we come across these actors and we say, oh, he was in an episode of such and such. Oh, he popped up in this and that. Jim Broadbent steals the show when he's in Only Fools and Horses, and he steals the show when he's in this. There's something about him, definitely.
There's obviously something about him. And he was, of course, courted for the role of Del Boy in Only Fools and Horses. Yes. Couldn't do it because he was busy with other work. But that he was the choice. And so they brought him in later as Slater, just for a few guest appearances. But yeah, like you say, the episodes he's in, they're well remembered because he's in them.
They're Slater episodes.
He turns up in this, absolutely steals the show.
Oh, let's talk about this. Let's talk about his performance.
Him and Margolyes are a double act.
I don't know that they are. Well, okay, they are, but it's almost like Margolyes is doing the physicality and Broadbent's doing the vocalization. However, Broadbent's physicality in this is brilliant as well. The way he leans in, the ingratiating grin, the timing, the accent is funny. It's such a good performance.
Edmundo, ¿qué tal es?
Now, Edmund, what's he like?
Well, I told you, this pudding. No. In la cama.
Now, what's he like in bed?
Bed. Well, in bed, he likes hot milk with just a little touch of cinnamon.
No. What is he like?
But I think it really works with, dare I say, Margolyes as the straight man.
Yeah.
To coin a phrase.
Yeah.
Because she's doing Spanish, she's doing the accent and everything. It's like she sounds like a legit Spanish person, albeit she's caricatures physicality and everything. But then he's the comedy. He's the one kind of hitting the punchlines. And so I think it does need the two of them for that to really work nicely. Otherwise, he's just a funny foreign voice, and that doesn't quite work in the same level. But it's not a Spanish accent. It's not. It's the way he manages to. I think there was a quote here from. I think it was Richard Curtis. I'm going to sort of paraphrase a quote or something, but he says, "It's remarkable to how he managed to completely miss the rhythms of the English language to such an extent.
Yes.
The emphasis he puts on things, and it is just an absolute masterclass. And that's not on the page, right? He's brought that to it because the script is just going to have the words, right? It might say he pronounces them in a funny way.
Yeah, I agree. There were several examples where absolutely it's all in the performance. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I think this is the performance of the series.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't know whether this is going to be appropriate for the podcast or not. When my wife and I were in intimate moments and perhaps initiating something intimate, I would often say, "Oh, my love, my love." That's a 40-year-old joke. We are, of course, now getting divorced. Let's go back to our episode. So we've now set up the fact that Blackadder is betrothed to this voracious sexual predator, and he's desperate to get out of it.
Walrus, as he calls it.
A walrus, yes. She's not even that fat. Okay, fine. It was a different time. So he's now desperately trying to get out of this. He's searching for ideas, and obviously now we have a Percy plan and a Baldrick plan. Percy's plan is what I would describe as a classic Baldrick cunning plan. Pretend to be mad, disguise yourself as a little pig, but crucially say moo, not oink. That's a classic Baldrick cunning plan, isn't it?
That is a Baldrick cunning plan, yeah.
Whereas Baldrick's plan is actually the plan that they go with. Make her think you prefer the company of men.
But I do prefer the company of men.
You don't mean like the Earl of Doncaster. I do mean like the Earl of Doncaster.
I quite like this, the euphemisms for homosexual. I believe the line was, he's been riding side saddle since he was 18.
Do you know what? I want to talk about this, because we often come across these older sitcoms, and it's like, oh, that's a bit, we couldn't say that now. I think this is dated all right, actually. I don't think you would make it now, but it's not offensive. It's light-hearted and jocular rather than anything offensive.
I put the same thing, something along the lines of, considering this was the early 80s, I think they get away with this.
Yeah. But is that because they're the alternative comedians of the 80s?
Perhaps. It's very much about effeminacy and campness, representing homosexuality, I guess.
Yeah. There's a scene here. This scene he practices being the Earl of Doncaster, and there's a lot of mugging. This is basically the Rowan Atkinson I dislike. It's pure
rubber-faced Rowan Atkinson.
Yeah, and I don't like the scene, but I didn't dislike the scene because I felt it was homophobic. I disliked the scene because it was crap. It's just that physical comedy that I don't like. Okay, so the plan is being put into action. So now we're back in the sort of throne room. Edmund's all dressed up and he's got rouge on his cheeks. He's fully Earl of Doncaster. The king comes in. He says, "Morning, Doncaster," which is quite funny.
Yeah.
Harry comes along and thinks it's all a lark.
Stag do.
Yeah.
My favourite bit here, actually, I think the funniest thing in the whole thing, Prince Henry's fruit-based speech that he's going to do at the wedding.
I want to run my best man speech by you.
I thought perhaps I'd go for a fruit motif.
Yes.
Something like, it is with extraordinary pleasure that we welcome you. May you be the apple of your husband's eye, and may he, in turn, cherish you. Cherish, you see.
Even though it's an arranged marriage. I think that's really good stuff.
Do you know, I got a better laugh out of you there than I did out of the Robert East's delivery of it.
But it's obviously delivered in the sense that, oh my God, what a crap speech. But I think that's good. That's good material.
That's solid. That is really solid.
It's a plum of a speech.
Okay, so next in, the Infanta comes in, and this is it now. She's going to see him, realises that he's rides side saddle and be disgusted and storm off back to Spain. That's how the plan is supposed to work. However, she simply thinks he's dressed as a Spaniard.
Yes, gay or European? Yes, the eternal question. Yeah, he's wearing the traditional garb of a Spaniard. So she's overjoyed with it. The plan backfires.
There's more brilliant Broadbent action here as well.
Yes, of course.
So now we need another plan.
Plan B?
Plan B is that he needs to be married to someone else. So we get a montage.
Yes.
As we are setting up this rushed wedding between Blackadder and Tully Applebottom, is this sort of giggling farm girl. And I've got to say it's funny because she's fat.
I don't think that's the general concept here. She's just a bit of a rosy-cheeked kind of farm woman. Sure. Let's go with ruddy-cheeked. Absolutely. Did you recognise her?
I did. Tell me where I recognised her from.
Well, she's Jane Freeman, and she is best known because she's the woman who runs the cafe in Last of the Summer Wine. So she was in that for 40 years. So yeah, that's pretty much what she's known for. Yeah.
Okay, so we're setting up this wedding, and with much hilarity, we find out that Tully Applebottom is already married, thus scuppering the plan by the arrival of her husband. And I definitely recognised her husband.
Yeah.
This is Howard Lou Lewis. This is Elmo from Brushstrokes. So anyone's my age, it's Elmo the barman from Brushstrokes. That's who it is.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because for my age, he's the guy in Maid Marian and Her Merry Men. That's what I know him from.
Now, so I'm a little bit too old for that. I do remember it, but not in the same way as you would.
But perhaps that could be a good way to segue into talking about Tony Robinson.
Oh, you mean the famous socialist archaeologist Sir Tony Robinson?
Yes, who of course one of his big shows was Maid Marian and Her Merry Men in the 90s, in which he doesn't really act particularly. It's funny, I don't think of Tony Robinson as an actor.
No, I've only ever really seen him do Baldrick. Now, we saw him. Do you remember we saw him in the 70s remake of The Rag Trade?
Yes, the pilot,
the Reg Varney role. But was it just the pilot? Okay, but that aside, that's literally the only other thing I've ever seen him in, other than Blackadder.
Yeah, I did have a quick look, actually, at his acting credits, see if there's any sitcom stuff. Most recently, he was a semi-regular in Man Down.
You know what? I'd forgotten that. But yes, he was. He plays this crazy old man. Yeah, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah, but there's a big chunk of about 20 years there where he was mostly presenting Time Team and things like that. So
well, and he was you know, I'm sort of joking about socialist knighthood, but he was very politically active. I think he was head of the Actors Union, wasn't he? And he was part of the TUC.
I think he was the deputy head, but yeah, he was very involved.
He was very active, yeah.
Apart from Blackadder, the only thing I can really associate him with is Maid Marian and Her Merry Men, which is essentially a sitcom. It's a kids' show.
Kids sitcom, definitely.
Sitcom. He's in an episode of Blue Heaven, apparently, which I've definitely seen, but I don't recall. And he was a big part of an 80s sketch show called Who Dares Wins. I was wondering if you might know.
Yeah, I do remember Who Dares Wins. That was Rory McGrath, Philip Mulville. The people who ended up making Chelmsford 1, 2, 3, if you want to make a sitcom connection.
Which Howard Lou Lewis is in Chelmsford.
He was. Yes, he was.
1, 2, 3, wasn't he? Yeah. So, he's part of that whole world in the 80s. But Baldrick is obviously what he'll be remembered for.
That's the first line of his obituary, I think.
Yeah. Baldrick dies. But still alive as we record. And doing well. We seem to have hit the sweet spot with 1983 as people who might pop off in the next few weeks before I edit this.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, fair play to them all. They're all doing well, aren't they? They're all had good innings between them.
Tony Robinson was a child actor. Did you know that? If you Google him, you can find a little picture of him as a teenager playing the Artful Dodger.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It looks really funny, just a young... And as a teenager, because he's like 5'4" or whatever he is, he would have, plied quite a good trade playing younger kids than you actually are.
Yeah.
It can be quite a handy thing to have as a teenager. Went to drama school, all that. Went into rep. Apparently did most of his rep at the West Yorkshire Playhouse in Leeds. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yeah.
But Baldrick, very much a breakthrough character, and he's not a young man here. He's well into his 30s. This is what made him famous.
Before this, how was Tony Robinson making his living? Was he brushing fossils?
He was, no. I don't think there was any of that going on. That's very much a later thing. But he does seem to have an interest in history, doesn't he? He's certainly... Because I honestly don't know. Was he just brought in as a presenter? We need a bit of personality to present Time Team. Was he actually interested in that? He's turned... Because he's presented all sorts of things like, the worst jobs in history and all that sort of thing. He's done all of it.
Yeah,
he's obviously interested in that. And I think a damn fine job at it as well. It really does. It's something like we're going to do archaeology like live on TV. We need someone with the personality to help us along.
Well, it's a terrible idea, isn't it?
Yeah, how did it work so well?
Well, I know you did. But people like different things, and that's okay.
Yeah, and everyone likes Tony Robinson, right?
I don't know. I've got... You might have to cut this because it might be libelous because I've got nothing to back this up, but I've just got in my head he's a bit of a git. I don't know where I've got that from, but I just think I've heard on the grapevine that Tony Robinson's a bit of a git.
I don't know about that. Everyone's a bit ornery sometimes. You get them at the wrong time.
Far be it from me to cast aspersions.
One last actor to talk about is Tim McInnerny.
Tim McInnerny?
Let's just talk about him because, again, I've seen him in loads of stuff. But I couldn't particularly place him anywhere except Blackadder.
Yeah, I don't think of him as a sitcom actor.
When I looked at his CV,
when I think about
sitcom,
Tim
really.
McInnerny, I think obviously Blackadder first. And then the second thing I think is he's playing an old Tory MP caught in a sex scandal. That's the kind of thing he does.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no that I had a quick look. There's no obvious sort of sitcom trivia to get into here. I don't think he was brought in as a bit of comedy flavour. Because he's the same age as Richard Curtis. They were at Oxford, albeit that's a big place. He's not in Not the 9 O'Clock News. He's not in Spitting Image. He's like this is his first thing. I don't think he was brought in as one of the old Oxford boys. Although I'm sure it didn't hurt.
Yeah, I was going to say
BBC.
Maybe.
But I don't think they came up together in that sense.
He's a character actor. I know that you've made that into a dreadful euphemism, but he is a character actor.
All right, well, that's our cast, I suppose. We never mentioned, actually, just speaking of actors, Jim Broadbent does have one sort of sitcom lead. Uh-huh. The Peter Principle. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that, yes.
Pretty basic office-based sitcom thing there, yeah.
I don't remember that. I watched that. I watched that when it went out, I suppose. I've certainly not seen it since. And I don't remember it with any great affection. Okay, let's finish off our episode then. So we've had that sham marriage broken up by Elmo from Brushstrokes. We're back to the Infanta who's meeting with the Queen. Now, we haven't really talked about the Queen. So this is Edmund's mum. And this scene is neither here nor there. It doesn't really add much to the narrative, but there's a bit more Broadbent excellence. But let's jump off and talk about, is it Elspeth Grey?
Elspeth Grey, yes. Who I think gets lost in this series as a character, as someone that should be a principal character. And like you're saying, the scenes she has are fairly kind of but nothing wrong with the performance or anything. It's just, I think it's just not, there's nothing there to really do. But Elspeth Grey, we've seen her before a couple of times.
Oh, have we? Tell me.
She's not someone who is particularly like a sitcom actor, but enough little guest appearances that we can talk about here. She was, of course, married to Brian Ricks all throughout their careers, and so she was kind of part of that set, Farce, or Whitehall Farce and all that. Their children are in comedy world as well. One of them best known as the mum off of the Kevin and Perry sketches.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I know exactly. I don't know her name, but I know exactly what you mean.
She's something Ricks. And the son was a producer who started a production company with Nigel Planer, and they made, amongst other things, My Hero, Faith in the Future, and loads of kids' shows as well. So he was a producer, really, I think. But, it's a family thing, is the thing.
Is that Louisa Ricks? Because I think I just saw her in an episode of Miranda.
Yes, she is.
There you go.
Yes. So, Elspeth Grey, we've seen her before. Where? Okay. Fawlty Towers. She is a psychiatrist, and Basil keeps thinking everything's about sex. And she was in an episode of Dinner Ladies.
Is she one of the mothers when all their mothers come in?
Mothers. She's Celia Imrie's mother, who is a bit posh and puts her down.
Okay, I remember the character, but I can't quite picture her.
Yes, and she's very different here because she's doing a kind of Flanders accent, whatever that is, and and she's always got this kind of head thing on that covers her hair up. Her real one kind of regular sitcom thing was in Solo. She was Felicity Kendall's mother in Solo.
Okay, all right.
But yes, lost in the mix, I think, don't you?
Yeah.
In the whole series?
I don't have any negative to say about this character, but I haven't really got much positive either. It's just, there's one of the episodes, the one after this, Which Smeller Pursuivant. She plays a bit more of a role in that. But even then, it's just, she doesn't jump out, does she?
Yeah, to say she is quite fundamental to how the plot falls together.
Yeah.
Shame. Actually, come to think of it, it's just I hadn't thought of this while I was watching it, but is she the only regular female character? And we are saying she's completely underserved.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the mix, perhaps.
Absolutely,
that's saying something. Yeah.
Well, you could say that about all the Blackadder series, couldn't you?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Okay, we'll deal with that later.
So the next scene, then, we go to Edmund's stag party, which is a very depressing scene. And it's obviously just the three of them, him, Baldrick and Percy. And they come up with the final plan. This one can't fail. They get the idea that if they can prove the Infanta is not a virgin, then he won't have to marry her. And the only way they can think of to do that is to send Baldrick in there to deflower her. But I'll die in there. That's such a lovely plaintive line.
They send him off like they're sending him off over the top.
I've written down here, this is like the final scene of Blackadder 4.
Yeah. We see him later and he's just bruised and battered. It's like, oh my God.
Yeah. He looks like he's been beaten up. Yeah. And of course, it comes to nothing. So the final scene is the wedding scene. It comes to nothing. Blackadder does this big reveal that she's not a virgin. It's just brushed off by the king, who says, "Oh, it doesn't matter. Only one of you has to be a virgin." So on we go.
Not sure that's really true, man.
I don't think that's true. Just in the nick of time, our messenger arrives.
Yes.
And he brings news which... there's a funny scene in which Brian Blessed guesses the news exactly. And it essentially means that he no longer needs to ally with Spain. The wedding's off, go home to Spain, clear off. And so therefore Edmund's going to have to marry someone else. So he now has to marry the beautifully named Princess Leia of Hungary. And we go back to our beautiful princess that we saw earlier. Do you remember earlier we saw these beautiful princesses and we thought, one of these is going to be Edmund's bride, and it turned out to be Miriam Margolyes. This time we had the same thing, and the reveal is Princess Leia is 7 years old, she's missing her front teeth, and she's just a child.
Yes, which I think is quite a nice little. Okay, what's the punchline here? It's
not a bad punchline.
Gag. Do you think it's slightly undermined by when they show us the beautiful princesses? They all look really young. One of them's definitely about 14.
They would have been acceptable.
Feels like it slightly undermines the joke. But yes, obviously in the arranged marriage world, the age isn't really relevant. It's a political issue. And so they are married. And then so Blackadder is then stuck with this kid that he has to amuse.
And reads her a bedtime story, which is quite sweet, really.
Yeah, it is kind of like, he's still the loser, but at least she's not fat.
Yeah, very true.
There is a bit of a postscript here, or should I say prescript, because there was a pilot episode that was unaired. It was an unaired pilot, and it has come to light in the years since.
Well, can I ask you about it before we talk about it? You sent me this a couple of days ago, and I watched it, and it come to light. I didn't even know this was a thing. I didn't even know it existed. Where did you find it?
Well, I found it on the internet, but I don't think it's ever been officially released in any sense, so I don't quite sure where it's come from. But there's a pretty good quality version of it on the internet if you care to look.
And you said earlier that this was made a year before the actual series. So can you fit this in terms of the production? Was this the BBC saying, right, Richard Curtis, Rowan Atkinson, show us what you can do?
Yeah, pretty much. There was a test of concept because I guess they were going to have to put some money into it. You'll notice that the pilot does not have the sort of sumptuous location shots. It's all kind of set on a stage. Yeah. And the plot of the episode is largely what we see in one of the episodes of the series itself.
It's the one with McAngus, the one with the Scottish...
the Scotsman. With some differences, but a lot of similarities.
Yeah, it's very similar. The main difference, I think the most notable differences for us to talk about is the casting differences. So we have, obviously, Rowan Atkinson. We got Tim McInnerny as he's in place. He had oddly dyed black hair, which was a little odd, but basically the same character. Baldrick is played by an actor whose face I recognised. I did Google him. Philip Fox, his name. Yeah. And perhaps you can tell me a little bit more about him, but I did recognise his face.
Yeah, he's just one of those faces. He's in loads of stuff. I'll tell you the one thing that I really was like, oh, that's where I know him from. It was an episode of I'm Alan Partridge. He plays an estate agent who's showing Alan around a house.
Okay, that'll be it. That will be it.
That was the one thing where I went, yes. But you look at his CV, it's littered with one-off sitcom roles, but there's nothing particularly to hold on to there.
So that was the big difference. But the character, well, it was very similar to how we've described Baldrick in this series. So not the Baldrick that we know from later series, but certainly it was there in place for this series.
Yeah. We've got Robert Bathurst as the Prince
Robert
Henry.
Bathurst, again, Toast of London.
Yes, and another one who pops up in sitcoms all the time.
He was in Red Dwarf, of course. Robert Bathurst,
of course. Yes. Elspeth Grey is the Queen still, and then we've
got John Savidant.
I say it's John Savidant.
John Savidant as the king. Yeah, and frankly, I will take him over Blessed any day.
Yeah, you would. The most notable thing that everyone always thinks when they watch this is how the Blackadder character in this particular incarnation is much more akin to the later Blackadder than we get in the first series.
Yes.
Which I think speaks to how they hadn't really figured out what they were doing with it. Because it's not that it doesn't work here and they went, oh, well, let's make him more snivelly and weaselly. It doesn't feel like that's what they tried to do, is it? Did you think it was better than what we got? Or
yeah, I do actually. I think there was some like production bits where it felt like it hadn't quite been finished. Do you know what I mean? But that's the nature of a pilot.
That's a pilot, yeah. That's fair enough.
You can forgive that. Yeah, I think the episode worked really well, and you're right about the characterization of Blackadder. I think it worked better.
I'll tell you what stood out to me. There's a big fight sequence. They Blackadder and the Scotsman.
Yeah, he and McAngus have this huge fight, and it lasts quite a long time, and it's well choreographed fight scene.
Yeah, and they're like, doing the whole Errol Flynn kind of going up the staircase fighting kind of thing.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about that is, it's not funny, it's a fight scene, there's not really any gags in it. And when we do this scene in the episode proper, Blackadder holds out his sword and is immediately smashed in half.
Yes.
And there is no fight. He's just immediately sort of emasculated. And
I think that the character of Blackadder, as we see it in this series, is not capable of that fight.
Yes. But in the pilot, he is, yes.
Yeah.
But interesting, like that's a lot of effort to go to. Even if you've got actors who have done a bit of stage combat experience, that's still a lot of effort to teach them.
That would have taken a while to choreograph, wouldn't it?
I feel like Rowan Atkinson is not the sort of, the way he came into acting is not through, I went to drama school and, did stage combat as a standard procedure. So I feel like they probably had to teach him from scratch.
Well, I definitely, I mean, like you say, that's available on the internet, easily findable. So I recommend people go and have a look at that if they can.
Can I ask you a little bit about the series in general, about the history that was involved?
Yeah.
Because this is very much posited as an alternative history. We kind
I'm
of go
a fan
off...
of alternative history. I think the word that they use is counterfactual history. Some butterfly flapped its wings in a different direction. What would be the impact? And the first episode of Blackadder is that butterfly flap. So the Battle of Bosworth, where Richard III is killed and Henry the Tudor takes over. That's our history. But in this timeline, essentially what we're saying is that Henry VII loses, or Henry Tudor loses, and Richard III carries on. And so the first episode of that is a kind of alternative Battle of Bosworth. We see that Brian Blessed is Richard IV.
Right, so he's supposed to be one of the princes in the tower, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah,
why is he
despite the
like
fact that
50
he's in his
years old?
40s. Yes, yeah. Well, it doesn't quite hang together perfectly. So Brian Blessed in this scenario is Peter Cook's son.
Yes.
But Peter Cook is killed in the battle,
nephew.
not by...
He's one of the princes in the tower.
That's true,
It's
yes.
his nephew, it's his brother's kid. Yeah.
So Brian Blessed is killed not by Henry Tudor.
No, Brian Blessed isn't.
So hang on. So Peter Cook is not killed by Henry Tudor, as he is in real life, but he's killed by a bumbling Blackadder who chops the head off the wrong person.
Yes.
And that's kind of how the episode plays out. He's trying to cover up the fact that he's killed the king.
But they did, in fact, win the Battle of Bosworth Field, so the next in line becomes king. That is Brian Blessed.
The entire scenario here is what would have happened if the Battle of Bosworth had gone the other way. I looked at the other episodes and sort of with a sort of amateur historical eye on them. So in episode 2, this is the one with the Scotsman. The thing that this is hung on is the fact that Richard's been off on crusade along with MacAngus, and they're back from their crusades, and MacAngus gets all of Edmund's lands in Scotland as a reward. Now, I don't think there are any crusades going on in the late 1400s. I looked it up because I thought that's too late for the crusades, and there are many different definitions of what a crusade is. The only thing I could that would have been around the same time is it was about the same time that the Spanish were driving the Muslims out of Iberia. They call it the Reconquista. And so they probably would have described that as a crusade, a holy war. But there were no English nobles fighting in that war. No. Episode 3 is the one where Edmund becomes Archbishop of Canterbury. And there's a whole riff in this episode about when Thomas Becket was killed by Henry II. Who, the story is that Henry II was lamenting the pain in the backside that Becket had become. And he said, "Who will rid me of this turbulent priest?" And these two drunk knights heard that and they went off and killed Becket. And so we actually see that being replayed in this episode. Of course, that feels like a very revisionist version of history, doesn't it? I think what actually happened was Henry II said, "Will someone please go and kill Becket for me?"
He's really
and two blokes did.
Yeah,
but that happened 300 years before the time the time that this is supposed to be set.
It does feel like what they're doing here is, rather than trying to be obviously historically accurate, obviously that's not what they're doing. It's almost parodying what you learned at school.
Yes.
And that also feels like what you get from if you watch Upstart Crow.
Yes.
It's not really parodying Shakespeare. It's parodying the kind of the atmosphere around Shakespeare and how it's taught and sort of all those little kind of gags that people would make about it. Oh, actually, it's just this and about. It's picking it apart.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it feels like that's what they're doing, really. So it's like, we're going to do a whole thing about witches, but it's not really historically accurate. It's just about
actually, the witch smeller episode was probably not that inaccurate, really. Obviously the details of it were fictional, but this is round about the time where the Pope was declaring witches a danger, and the whole witch finder thing was really getting underway. If you think about, like, the Witchfinder General, Matthew Hopkins, was later than this. He was like 150 years later. You think Witchfinder? I don't know about you, but I think of someone in a Puritan outfit, that middle 1600s, that kind of thing. And that's certainly true. But there would have been women being burned as witches during this period, definitely.
It's weird because here in this, Frank Finlay seems to be dressed up as a badger to playing this character.
That's true. That's it. But again, we've talked about this, that casting. That Frank Finlay's a proper classical actor. He's not a comedian. He's not a sitcom actor. And then the final episode, Blackadder gathers together the 6 most evil men in the kingdom and attempts a coup d'etat. And this episode ends with everybody dying, basically, which establishes the precedent for everybody dying in the final episode of Blackadder. And I guess that puts us back onto our timeline that Henry Tudor became king, and here we are.
That's it.
I suppose that's the way they reset things. But again, these 6 most evil men, those actors they're all straight actors. There's not a comedian among them, really.
Well, definitely some of them I know from comedy stuff.
Yeah, Roger Sloman's in there, isn't he?
Yeah,
but you know what I mean. They're not. They're like scenery chewing hammy actors.
Yeah, and I think that was, like you said, that's the idea, getting these classic stage actors to give this the feel of a I, Claudius kind of stagey TV production.
Yeah.
But is it funny?
Well, okay, let's finish off with that. Because remember I said at the beginning that the received wisdom about Blackadder is that it was a poor start and not a patch on the others. And that was my opinion before I rewatched it. So having rewatched it, I will say that I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I thought more of it than I remembered, but it's not a patch on the other 3.
Yes, I largely agree with that. I definitely don't like it as much as the later series. I feel like it's loose. It hasn't figured out what it is yet. It feels like a first draft. And perhaps that's exactly what we got. Like, for example, that the first episode, I think, is really not in format and not in a good way. I found it really odd when I discovered there was a pilot, because that first episode feels like a pilot, and then the later series is like, we've worked out what we're doing with it. Maybe they're just having to get too much narrative into that first episode. But, you've got Peter Cook as a ghost and all this sort of stuff, that it's all a bit clunky. It doesn't feel like the format of a sitcom. Loads of location stuff. Whereas the bulk of the series, perhaps the last episode is an exception, but the bulk of the series feels more like, okay, this is our situation. What are our characters up to this week? The last one is a bit format breaking, but I'm more forgiving of that because it's a sort of end of the series with kind of throwing everything out kind of thing. Don't know if it works that well, but there we go. So, yeah, it feels like a first draft. And, what we got as the second draft was a lot better. It's just all tightened up a little bit, and they've figured out what they're doing. And obviously, the main, we'll talk about this next time we deal with it, but the main big change was that Rowan Atkinson left the writing staff and Ben Elton came in. Now, that seems to be the turning point. Yeah. How much did that affect it? Is he better writer of structure rather than just gags, or who knows?
Well, I think we've talked about this before, haven't we, about Ben Elton? But yeah, he's a writer. He's a bloody good writer.
Okay. I've got one last thing. I want to put out a bit of a question to other people out there, because you can get like the full scripts published in a book of all the Blackadder, which I haven't got to hand, unfortunately, because I've got a question which someone out there will know the answer to. There's a particular scene in this episode that we've looked at in which Brian Blessed, playing about with his horses and little men, plotting out the battles, and at one point he gets angry and smashes a horse into a ground, and its legs break off because it's obviously made of polystyrene or something.
Yeah.
And he kind of, at the end of the scene, after everything's finished, he holds it up and goes, "Fresh horses," which seems to be an ad lib. It seems to be just kind of Brian Blessed off the cuff, because they can't have known it was going to break for a start. But also he kind of looks off camera in a kind of like, "Ooh, should I do this?" kind of way.
And that's a good observation. I saw that line and thought, oh, that's very clever, because that's his line earlier on in the, but I didn't thought it was ad libbed. Yeah.
It feels like it is to me, just on the vibe. So I wonder if anyone's
asking, is it in the script?
Is it in the script? And particularly if those, I presume the script books that are published are the original scripts rather than
they might not be
what actually went out. I don't know. But if anyone
transcripts,
that would be an interesting, just little bit of trivia.
It would be interesting.
Let me know.
So we will return to see Edmund in his later incarnations. I'm not exactly sure when. Certainly not in this series, but we'll be back to Blackadder at some point.
Well, Gareth, we've said this week, we don't think we've really represented women very well this week. So shall we try and change that next time?
Yeah. So I already mentioned that I saw Louisa Ricks in an episode of Miranda.
Why are you watching Miranda, Gareth?
Well, it's because I'm watching all of the episodes of Miranda in preparation for our next podcast.
Yes.
Next week's show will be about Miranda, and we will let you know which episode we're going to cover on our social media channels.
Yes, nice change of pace, I think. A little precursor. I've watched bits and pieces of Miranda. It seems fine to me, relatively harmless fun. I've never really dived into it properly, so how will I react?
You know I dislike physical comedy and farce.
Oh dear.
Let's wait and see what I think of Miranda.
She's a real character actor though, Miranda Hart. That's the...
On that bombshell, let's wrap up. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed. I genuinely enjoyed watching this again, and like I say, I don't think it's as good as the others, but I certainly enjoyed it more than my memory of it. If you would like to follow us on social media, please do. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at BritComPod. Or if you go on Facebook and just search for the British Sitcom History Podcast, you'll find us there. Thanks everyone, and we will see you with Miranda next week. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.